Hello, what is up, everybody? Hey, y'all. Torella here, and I am Norma. Thank you so much for being here. You're so sweet. Okay, so I'm gonna be doing something kind of new. I gotta get comfortable, I guess. I'm gonna be doing some live streams. Okay, so this Karen Read retrial is my Roman Empire. I watched all of the first trial. I watched almost every single pretrial hearing leading up to this second trial. And I would like to discuss it with all of you guys, right? So like I think this will be a fun thing to do. I would love to be able to get to the point where I could just like stream live court, but I don't think that I'm there yet. So what I'll do is we'll kind of hit highlights of like the testimony that is happening. So like today we're going to do opening statements. This happened yesterday. The trial started yesterday. So I'll probably be going a day or two behind and hitting the high points. I'll have some stuff up for you and we'll go through it all. I do want to give you just a quick rundown of the case if it's not something that you're familiar with yet. Also, if there is anything that sounds weird or anything like that, please do let me know. I will go ahead and warn you that the audio for... I'm still trying to learn like all this stuff. The audio from the prosecutor is not great. He moves around the courtroom a lot. He does not stay in front of the microphone. It is very inconvenient for everybody watching the stream that's not there in the courtroom. So I will do my best with that. I mean, there's only so much you can do with that kind of sound. And then we'll obviously talk about it and I'll kind of reiterate some things. Okay, so a quick rundown of where the case stands or what the case is if you're not familiar with it. In 2022, Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found dead or dying. He was not doing well at the time that they found him on another Boston police officer's front lawn. And Karen Read, the defendant in this case, was the girlfriend of John O'Keefe at the time, and she has been charged with being drunk, hitting him with her vehicle, leaving him there to die. And she has pled not guilty to all of these charges. She's charged with 3 different counts. And this happened January 29th, 2022. She's pled not guilty. We've already gone through one trial, which ended in a hung jury. That is also fraught with its own issues. Some of the jurors after said, no, we did reach a verdict on some of the counts. There was a lot of confusion there. Anyway, we are now in the second trial. As I said, I have watched the trial already, the first trial. So even though I know a lot of what's going to be coming, and even though I know a lot of the evidence in the case and the way that it has been collected, which is going to be a big deal, and all kinds of things, I'm also going to try to approach this trial from a juror's perspective who didn't watch the first trial. So like, again, I can't really do that, but I kind of want to talk about these opening statements as if like, if I didn't know anything about the case, what would I think about it? Let me know in the chat or in the comments. Have you watched the first trial? Have you followed this case? Do you know anything about it? Hi, Madison. Thank you. I'm so glad too. I watched this trial, so like I might as well like do something with it, right? Like, why not talk to you guys about it? Now, my husband has been a trooper and he's listened to a lot of Karen Read stuff, but you guys are who I need to be talking about this with, right? Okay, so I'm going to start here. Well, let's talk about a little bit of the differences here. So in the first trial, the prosecutor was Adam Lally. He is here in the courtroom today. He is not going to be prosecuting this case. Bless his heart, okay? Bless his heart. Adam Lally, I'm sure that he's a great lawyer. I think that his approach was tough to follow. It was tough to, it was very boring, and it droned on and on and on and on. His opening statement is night and day difference between the now different prosecutor. This is special prosecutor Hank Brennan. He is a defense attorney by day and a special prosecutor in this case. The defense team is largely the same. We've added one new attorney that is going to be kind of front and center. Bob Alessi, he's new, but Alan Jackson is kind of the main defense attorney. He's going to be giving the opening statement today. David Unetti is the other major defense attorney in the case. And Ronnie, thank you for being here again. No, I have not watched that documentary. And that is something that I think we are going to cover over on our Doc Jams on Patreon. So I have been saving it for that. But some of her statements in that documentary are going to come into this trial. One of them being, the opening statement one actually is from Dateline, never mind. But they're going to be playing some of her statements. The other quick thing on, you know what? I'm going to try 1.25 playback speed on the trial audio. If it's too fast, the only reason I hesitate with that is normally that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it a little faster. So you will be able to tell that it sounds a little different as far as like fast, slow. But Hank Brennan, he's so quiet, it's hard to hear him. I may at times bump him back down to normal speed, but I just want to let you know that I usually kind of jack it up because trial is just very slow. It is very, very, very slow. Okay, Norma did not watch the first trial. I would love to see... I would just love to see how you feel as the evidence comes out, because I think that now this is a very polarizing case too, and there are going to be people that big fat disagree with me, and that's okay. We can all have nice discussions, debates, whatever it is, but we can be kind to each other, right? And obviously KQTs are always like really mature, which I love. I don't know if she's guilty or innocent, and I put that in air quotes because, you know, what we're looking for is, does the state prove their burden? I can tell you that in the first trial, I did not find the state to have proved their burden beyond a reasonable doubt. And I will also say that in the first trial, the state did not even prove that a vehicle hit John O'Keefe. And we're going to talk about that in Hank Brennan's opening statements too, because he makes some comments that sort of go along with that still. So again, they do have some new experts testifying in this trial. They have some new evidence that will be coming into this trial that maybe we didn't have access to in the first. But if a car did not hit John O'Keefe, then why are we bringing this case? And why do we bring it 2 times, guys? You know, that's right, per the injuries. And we'll hear that in this first opening statement. So I'm going to be a big YouTuber and I'm switching. Okay. And now I'm going to push play, I think, because this is where I made my first notes to play. All right. So again, this audio is not going to be great, so bear with me. I will talk you through what he's saying. I'm going to pause things and stuff like that.
Over John O'Keefe, he looked up, and the defendant approached him, and you'll see it on the video. Now, he wanted any information, because when you're trying to save someone, you want to know, are they on drugs, medication, do they have a heart condition? And he looked up at Miss Reed, and he said...
Also, I do have the closed captions up here, so hopefully that will help. They're pretty accurate. It sucks to have to read it on YouTube. I totally get that. I have this turned all the way up that it will go. He just is moving around so much. He's not using any notes. He's not staying at the podium. I did forget to tell you what he said before I got to this part where I push play. So here we are learning together. All right, so Hank Brennan, this is Hank Brennan. He starts by telling the story of January the 29th, 2022 through Firefighter Timothy Nuttall's point of view, POV. It's his POV on the whole sitch, okay? Now, he's going to be the first witness. We're not going to talk about him on the stand today. It was interesting. But he kind of does it felt very like Eminem, like mom spaghetti kind of situation. He's he walks into the fire station and the alarm goes off and his heart is beating and he's sweating and he's, what's it going to be? I don't know what it's going to be, all this stuff. He does make a point to describe his bag and equipment, the things that he's going to get together to bring on the call with him, as meticulous. I found that interesting, just knowing what I know. And, he says that they're responding to a cardiac arrest. They get to the scene. There is tons of noise. There are people there screaming. There are sirens. There is chaos. There is a lot going on. The wind is howling. These are blizzard conditions in Boston in January. So this is kind of all setting the scene. And then he kind of starts to talk about here that the firefighters and first responders need to know what is going on with this man, what has happened here. Does he have a heart condition? Is he on any kind of drugs or medication or anything like that? Like, these are things that they need to know. And so firefighter Nuttall looks up at Karen Read and says, "What happened?" And then he is going to finish this.
What happened? And you'll hear her words through firefighter Nuttall. She said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And it was at that time, through the words of the defendant, that she admitted what she had done that night, that she hit John O'Keefe. Now, those words didn't mean anything to firefighter Nuttall. They weren't in context. They didn't reconcile with the injuries. It didn't help him in his treatment, so he ignored it.
Okay. I hate to stop so fast. He says, Karen Read says to him, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." 3 times. That was a big theme in the first trial too. And he says, this firefighter says, those words didn't mean anything to him. They weren't in context. And they did not reconcile with the injuries. So it did not help him in his treatment. So he ignored it. He's not a police officer. He's not an investigator. That's not his job. What is he supposed to do with that information? I would love to know, anybody in the medical field. Now, I'm not in the medical field. I used to work in the medical field. I don't anymore. I cannot imagine a time where if I were to respond to a scene where I don't know what happened, would somebody saying I hit him, I'm having trouble understanding why the Commonwealth is going to try to go with, in this instance, the way that he got injured doesn't matter to me. Does that not then change the trajectory of your treatment in any way, shape, or form?
Firefighter Nuttall is not a police officer. He is not an investigator. He is not a detective. He's a first responder. And so he takes that information. It was useless to him. He continues to work on John O'Keefe, trying to save his life. You'll see the team put him on a stretcher. And when they lift him from the ground, even though there is snow.
Well, that's not good. It appears to have frozen. There we go.
His cell phone.
I think it's a stream. It's not.
Bring him to the ambulance. You'll see on the videos that other first responders who speak to the defendant. One first responder, Mr. Flamati, she will say, "I hit him. I hit him. Oh my God, I hit him." And then she was interviewed or asked questions for background information, not a criminal investigation, just background to try to help John. And she was asked questions about his background. And during that conversation, you won't hear see the defendant with a person by the name of Jen McCabe and a firefighter McLaughlin. And she tells Fire McLaughlin, the third first responder, "I hit him."
Okay, so he's saying here that these first responders on the scene are trying to get information from her. What happened to him? Give me some background information on this man. And she's running around basically just telling everybody. She tells firefighter Nuttall, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." She tells firefighter Flamati, Anthony Flamati, who will testify in this trial, I'm positive, "I hit him, oh my God, I hit him." Then on the dash cam, you will see her with another woman who was at the scene with her, Jen McCabe. We're going to hear from Jen McCabe. I'm positive we will. We heard a lot from her in the first trial. that they're standing together and that Katie McLaughlin, another firefighter or first responder, comes over, and she's trying to get just background information. She's not investigating the case, anything like that. And she tells her as well, I hit him. Like this is what we're hearing, that she is just continuing to tell people that she hit him. Just keep that in mind.
Mr. O'Keefe at Moose Merritt Hospital, and his body is cold. The doctors work feverishly. They treat him, try to save him. They try to warm his corpse. And unfortunately, Firefighter Nuttall's first instinct was accurate. John O'Keefe passed.
So they're not able to save him.
We are here today because John O'Keefe was killed by the actions and conduct of that defendant, Karen Reed. You will learn through this case, through facts, science, and data, you will learn that on January 29th, 2022, when the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe were in front of 34 Fairview Road, all the way to the left side in a dark corner near a flagpole, you will learn that Mr. O'Keefe got out of the car. He got out, and he stood by the side of the road after an argument with the defendant. That argument, that anger fueled by heavy intoxication, you will learn from the science and data as he stood by the side of the road, the defendant in her SUV drove away. She drove at least 35 feet away. The argument was over. It had ended. But then she stopped. She stopped. She put the Lexus into neutral, and she waited. And the facts and the science and data will tell you that despite the fact the argument was over, she then put the Lexus into reverse, put her foot on the gas pedal, and began to press, not 25%, not 50%, up to 75% acceleration. There was a light dusting of snow. The Lexus tire spun backwards. She went backwards at least 70 feet. She clipped John O'Keefe. He fell backwards, hit his head, broke his skull. And there he lay at the corner.
He needs to stay with the mic is what he needs to do.
On the ground, lying on top of his cell phone, alone. And then the defendant will later tell that when she left, he didn't look mortally wounded. Yet he was. And she simply drove away. Now, before I tell you...
Okay. So, yes, I wish he would have stayed at the podium because you can't hear a friggin' word he says. But he goes into talking about John O'Keefe, who he was, that he was a great man. And he was. By all accounts, John O'Keefe was a great man, that this was a terrible loss for the community, for his family, obviously, for those that loved him. He does tell the story about how John O'Keefe's sister had passed away. And then I believe it was a few months later, his brother-in-law also passed away. So their two children were orphaned by their parents having separate medical conditions and passing away, which is absolutely heartbreaking. And John O'Keefe actually adopted those two children. And so he was raising them as his own. And and that is incredible. And so he kind of talks about how he and Karen Reed met, that they were dating and all of these things. He then gets into the timeline that they had been out that night drinking. I will warn you, every single person almost in this case, except for like first responders, were drinking and driving that night. And I'm even talking about law enforcement. There's a lot of drinking and driving in this case. Like literally almost everybody. It's pretty wild. And they're just like, yeah. I had like 8 drinks. I had like 5 drinks. I had like 4 drinks. And then I went here and they're just like, yeah. And then I drove there and I went back to work and I went here and I did that. It's pretty wild. But Karen Reed's on trial. So she was drinking. She was driving. And they had met up with some friends at the Waterfall Bar and Grill. They started at C.F. McCarthy's, then they go to Waterfall. The people that they were hanging out with were going to go back to their home at 34 Fairview. Their son was having a birthday party there. They're like, oh, does everybody want to come back, hang out, that kind of thing. So John and Karen decide to go, except that they don't really know where they're going. And so they get lost. And Jen McCabe, who again we will hear from, ends up calling John and is like, do you know how to get here? Or maybe he is asking her, I don't know how to get there. So she says, oh, it's near Bella's mom's house. And this is a woman that John O'Keefe had dated previously. That's going to come back up. They end up finding the house, I guess. Hank Brennan says that prior to this, their relationship seemed pretty okay, but in 2022, it began to fall apart. He says that John O'Keefe started pushing Karen away and she wouldn't leave. She didn't want that. And that's kind of when the tension started. So, and remember, this is January 29th, 2022. So it's like within the last few weeks, things started to get on the rocks. He wanted to break up with her. She wouldn't leave, is what Hank Brennan says. He also talks about that John O'Keefe's phone was underneath his body there in the snow where they found him. And he calls it the healthcare data will show. I think he means Apple Health data, like from the phone. But he says healthcare data, location data will show what happened. He says, you know, that the black box information on the vehicle is going to show that they did a 3-point turn in the driveway. That then she parks in the front yard. And that will, if you've not followed this before, I know 34 Fairview, I feel like the back of my hand now, but here's the house. She does not park in the driveway. She pulls in front of the house. They're still at that point not sure that they're at the right place. So she pulls in front of the house. There's a flagpole here. So she's kind of pulled up sort of near that, parks by the flagpole. And he talks about witnesses who had arrived at the house in a truck. They saw the defendant and John O'Keefe there at the truck. I'm sorry, at her vehicle, which is a black Lexus SUV. And then we are going to move forward here some.
That location at 12:34:33, and they're in the car and they stay there. The truck waits. They speak to somebody in the house who comes out. The person goes back.
I'm wondering from you guys, because it's so quiet, and I have like 10 minutes of audio right here. Do you guys just want me to tell you what he says here? Because it is really low on the sound. It's really low. It's like I'm having to like, you know, so I'll play it for another minute, but if you guys would prefer me to just kind of tell you what he says, I can do that as well.
In the house, and we're there for about 5 minutes. We're now down to 2 minutes before the collision. The truck leaves, and now it's just the defendant and John. And while they're waiting outside, 12:27, John gets a text from McCabe. Park behind us in the driveway. 12:29, she texts again. Are you coming in?
Okay, I will do that. So sorry. I don't know why. It's low on every single feed, and I don't know enough about streaming to get it way up, but other streams that I've watched are just super low. It's been difficult to hear the whole time. So he says, John begins getting texts from people like, hey, Jen McCabe, come park behind me in the driveway. Are you coming in? All of these kind of things. And so she's in front of the flagpole. It's dark. It's windy. He says John O'Keefe had been in that car. He brings in the healthcare data. It shows that nobody's moving, all that kind of stuff. So then at some point he gets out of the car. He says at 12:32, John closes his phone for the last time. And this will be the last time that he uses the phone. And then he says the Lexus then moves like 35 feet forward, and then she slams it into reverse, the tire's spinning. They're arguing. He says you'll know they're arguing because the next morning she tells the firefighter, I'm sad because our last moments were fighting. She drives away. Later she makes statements that he didn't look mortally wounded when she left him. They're going to play a clip that's from a Dateline interview, so we will hear her say that. He does talk about the battery temperature of the phone. So as he's going through his timeline, he says, you know, at this time, the phone is 77 degrees. You know, it's in a warm car. Now, after 5 minutes, it drops to 72 degrees. Karen Read then drives to John O'Keefe's house because she was staying there that night. She starts leaving him messages. One of the messages she says, and she sounds angry in these messages. In one of them, she says, John, I fucking hate you. Like, and we'll hear those in the trial. They do not sound nice at all. She makes almost 40 calls that night to his phone. And Hank Brennan says the phone never moves. The temperature continues to drop. All of those things. He also kind of calls out that, well, he says that she, on one of the messages that she leaves, she says, John, nobody knows where you are. And he's like, but she hasn't talked to anybody. And so this is where the cover up begins. He says she knew where he was, but she didn't call 911. She didn't go back there. She didn't leave like an anonymous tip or anything that night for somebody to go check on him, anything like that. She makes more phone calls. Eventually she falls asleep. She wakes up around 5 o'clock. She notices that John is not there, and so she wakes up his niece and says, call Jen McCabe. I need to find out where he is. Jen McCabe says, she calls me, wakes me up, and she says, John's dead, he's dead. How would she know that if she doesn't know where he is? She says, I left him at the waterfall. They also call another person, Carrie Roberts, another friend. Carrie Roberts is a friend of John O'Keefe, somebody who is not friends with the defendant, but knows John. And Jen and Carrie end up saying, we'll help you go look for him, basically. So they get together, and their testimony is that Karen Reed says, I was so drunk last night, I don't really remember anything, which is interesting to me because you could look at that two ways. You could say, well, she was so drunk that night that she could have hit him and she didn't know it. But then we've got this catch-22 where he's saying she's covering this up. She knows exactly where she left him. But if she's so drunk she doesn't remember anything, doesn't that kind of discount what you're saying in that moment? Kind of nitpicky, but it is something, right? When she's with Carrie Roberts and Jen McCabe, she says, my taillight's broken. Look at this, my taillight's broken. So her right taillight is broken. He says the defendant desperately wants to go to 34 Fairview Road, but Carrie Roberts takes over and says, we're going to go back to John's house. Maybe he's, I moved the whole thing. Maybe he's in the house and you just missed him. Maybe you just didn't see him, right? They go back there. There is a Ring video cam where they go back to look for John. We will see that. And they go back to 34 Fairview Road. And he says, these are blizzard conditions, whiteout conditions. You can't see anything. It's very dark outside. Nobody can see anything. But as they're driving through, Karen Reed says, there he is. I see him. There he is. Let me out of this car. She gets out of the car. She runs right to him, right where she left him. Right? They don't see him, but she does, because she knew exactly where he was because she left him there. So they then call 911. She is wiping the snow off John's face. They start first aid, all of these things. So the firefighters get there. His cell phone battery is now down to 37 degrees, and Carrie Roberts picks it up, puts it in her pocket. The police, everybody's there. He says they're not sure where to look in the area where John's body is. So they find glass from the car. They find blood spots. Okay, this killed me. They said, oh my God, Andrew, you're supposed to be at work. That's my husband. Thank you. And hi, Sarah. Hi, Kaylee. And hi, Madison. So they say that, or Hank Brennan says, this killed me. I'm not going to lie to you. He said they pick up evidence. They find the blood spots in the snow, and he says, and they put it in plastic containers to store it for later. And the cackle I cackled, because if you have not listened to this case at all or do not know the ins and outs, okay, well, I'll just ask you, what do you think the police officers would have put the blood they found at the scene? What type of plastic container do you think they would have put that in? If you are thinking to yourself, well, an evidence container of some sort, something that is sterile, that a police officer would use. You're wrong. it's red Solo cups. Now, technically, Hank Brennan is correct. They are made of plastic. They got them from some neighbor's garage, but it's red Solo cups, y'all. No lids. And they put them inside Stop and Shop bags, which I guess is like a grocery store or convenience store there. Paper bags, again, from somebody's garage. Canton, Mass has never heard of evidence containers, y'all, okay? They don't know what that is. Don't come at them with that shit. They don't know what it is. So that really killed me. He really glazes over and they put them in plastic containers and we move on. Like, okay, Brennan. So they go to the hospital. Karen Reed has actually been brought in because she's so hysterical that they actually thought that she needed to maybe be evaluated for like possible suicidal thoughts and things like that. They end up going back to the house. It does appear that we are going to hear from, and at the time that I'm recording this, this probably already happened, but we're going to hear from John O'Keefe's mom in this trial. She did not testify in the last trial, but he talks about her perspective quite a bit. So it does seem like she's going to be testifying this time. Obviously, they have to notify the children. I cannot imagine the heartbreak with that. And we're going to hear a lot about this broken taillight. So the police end up getting a warrant to take the car so that they can process it, obviously. He keeps talking about the science, the data. All of these things are going to show you that this happened the way that we said it happened, that she backed into him, and when she backed into him, her taillight broke. He says that there were pieces of broken taillight littered around John's body. When they got to the hospital, there was a shoe missing. As time went by and the snow melted, they were able to find the shoe near his body, where his body had been in the yard, because obviously the snow had melted. Over the course of 10 days, as the snow melted, all the different pieces of broken taillight were found. We will get into that. And he also says that John's DNA was on the back of the taillight as well. And he says that John was clipped by the car. He fell backward on the hard frozen ground is how he fractured his skull. He says that he has an expert that's going to testify to that. And which is interesting because now I don't know about the cold hard ground, but it's interesting that if you fall backward, he did not fall on the pavement. They're not alleging that. They're saying that he fell in the grass and that it was so frozen that when he fell backward, he fractured his skull. And then he kind of talks about the charges that, she left him there. She knew that she'd hit him. She, all of those things. That's why they're charging her. You should find her guilty, basically. And he does talk about, now I'm going to have to find this spot because it was just going to be here it is. So he does play a clip, and I think you'll hear this better.
Play for you clip one. You're going to hear the first of the statements that she made after she was charged.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
Okay, so then he basically says, thanks. So let's now move to the defense's opening statement, which is just a couple seconds from here. I'm basically going to try to cut out where Alan Jackson gets out of his chair. And he, it scrapes so much and it's really, really loud. Now we're getting too loud, and before it was too quiet. Okay, here we go. Here we go. So, Yes, Justin. He asked about Karen Reed's attitude. You can see her face here. She has one of the best RBFs I have ever seen in my entire life. And I obviously don't know her personally, but as Norma put it in a very nice way, it is her personality appears to be an acquired taste. Now, I'm from Tennessee. We're fairly nice to everybody. She's from Boston. It does also appear that the way that some of them talk to each other is like, yeah, fuck you, you know, and they flip each other off when they're driving by and stuff like that. Like, not that we don't do that here to like our friends or whatever, but there may be some of that too, but no, I don't. From what I understand, she's not the kind of, how do I want to say this? I'll say it this way. It would not do her well. She would not come across well to the jury if she testified. I don't think there is any way that she will testify in this trial. She did not testify in the last trial. I don't think that it would go well for her. I think her defense team obviously knows that. So yeah, she's got some tude. I would agree with that.
May I? The evidence in this case will establish above everything else
Much better audio.
3 points. Here. There was no collision with John O'Keefe. There was no collision. There was no collision. John O'Keefe did not die from being hit by a vehicle. Period. The facts will show that. The evidence will show that. The data will show that. The science will show that. And the experts will tell you that. You'll learn that the Commonwealth has pinned its entire...
Also, just wondering, before the defense does their full opening statement here, after hearing the prosecution's opening statement, if you don't know anything about this case, would you, sitting on the jury, be like, oh, wow, this sounds like a slam dunk case? Does it sound like, I don't really know, I need to hear everything? Like, what would your feeling be if you were sitting on the jury? And then I'll ask the same question after this is completed. If you already know everything about the case, how did you feel, or watch the first trial, how did you feel about Brennan's opening versus Lally's? I would say it was much, much better. I think he just has a better presentation, but just wondering what you guys think.
Their case on a brazen and a flawed assertion that is untethered, unconnected to the facts and to the evidence. And their assertion is contrary to science. Because at the end of the day, folks, there was no collision with John O'Keefe. So how did we end up here? How does Karen Reed end up sitting in that chair on trial for an event that literally never happened? Well, the evidence is going to explain it. And it can be summed up in the following text message at the very beginning of this investigation. A text message of a now fired Massachusetts State Police officer named Michael Proctor. He was the lead investigator on this case, and he was talking about a fellow officer, a fellow cop, who owned the property where John O'Keefe's body was found. Text message with a buddy. Question, is the homeowner going to catch any shit? Answer, nope. He's a Boston cop too. That quote defines...
I have to say, it is so interesting to me. And if you haven't followed this case, you might not know the Michael Proctor of it all. But Brennan doesn't mention Proctor at all. He's the lead investigator in the case, and he's now fired, and Jackson's going to give us more information about that. But him leaving Proctor out of his opening statement, that's a choice, Brennan. And I mean, I guess you either do it or you don't do it, but yikes.
The lack of integrity of the Commonwealth's entire case, its entire investigation, and this prosecution. During the course of this trial, you'll learn much more about Mr. Proctor, why he said that, and what it really means. What you'll see and hear in this courtroom in the coming weeks is not just a story of a tragic loss. And make no mistake, John O'Keefe's death is and was a tragic and tragic loss. But the story you'll hear is about an investigation that was riddled with errors from the beginning, a rush to judgment, conflicted and corrupted from the start. Corrupted by bias, corrupted by incompetence, and corrupted by deceit. Finally, it was corrupted by a deliberate effort to avoid and to cover up the very truth that you are seeking. You'll find when you hear the evidence that the Commonwealth's case is the literal definition of reasonable doubt. They won't be able to talk their way out of it. They won't be able to explain their way out of it. They won't be able to excuse their way out of it. And they can't meet their extreme.
This is a really interesting question from Justin. He says, just wanted to know what the motive would be, too. That's a great question. The opening statement from the prosecutor didn't really handle that much. He touched on, well, they'd been fighting, and he was trying to get rid of her, and she didn't want to break up, essentially. And he didn't even say that much. That appears to be what they feel the motive is, that she was angry, that she was possibly going to lose him. At least I'm pulling from what they talked about some in the first trial. Now, there will be evidence that comes out that would seem to contradict that, but that seems to be what they think the motive would be. But they really don't touch on it much. Now, does the prosecution have to have motive to prove their case? No, they don't. Does a jury like it? Yes, they do.
Extreme burden of proof, which the court will tell you is beyond any and all reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty. Members of the jury, Karen Reed found John O'Keefe dead on the front lawn of a Boston police officer, Brian Albert, at 6 a.m. on January 29th, 2022. Picture the scene. Blood-curdling screams. Ambulances, emergency lights on, fire engines, ladder trucks, paramedics, patrol vehicles, patrol cruisers, police officers, first responders, firefighters, all swarming all over Brian Albert's lawn, literally feet under his bedroom window. Yet Brian Albert, a sworn peace officer, a first responder himself, never came outside. Never went outside to see what the chaos was about, never went outside to see if he could assist a man in need, never walked outside his house to see if he could help a fallen fellow officer on his own front lawn.
Does that strike anybody as strange that he's a police officer? Now, we will see photos as the trial goes on of 34 Fairview Road. The front yard is not that big. It's not that big. It's a few car lengths, as far as like the driveway to the house kind of thing. It's not huge. So everybody right there on his front lawn, police officers, the lights are going, sirens pulling up. Karen is screaming bloody murder in that front yard. There is a lot going on. They don't turn a light on. They don't open the door. They don't come outside to see what's going on. Now, Brian Albert's testimony in the first trial was he didn't hear any of that. He didn't know what was happening. He was asleep. That seems very strange to me, but I don't know. Maybe some of you would do the same thing. Like I'm very interested to know, because it struck me as like, why would you not even come outside? Like, everybody has nosy neighbors, right? Like, I'd want to be out there and be like, what's going on over there? So I don't know. It's very strange.
More shockingly, you'll learn that lead investigator for the Massachusetts police, Michael Proctor, never set foot inside Brian Albert's house that day. Never engaged in any investigation inside that house that day, even though a party with much alcohol had just occurred in that house, and even though a Boston police officer was found dead or dying just mere feet from the front door on that lawn. He never secured the crime scene, never separated and secured witnesses. He never properly collected evidence. He never secured the evidence. He never searched for signs of a struggle inside or outside the home. He never properly canvassed the neighborhood. Michael Proctor never did any of these things, even though fellow officers of Michael Proctor's actually mentioned, in their words, not mine, that it looked like John O'Keefe may have been, quote, in a fight. You'll have questions about that conduct. During the course of this trial, you'll find that the Commonwealth will not have answers. You'll see from the evidence in this case that this case carries a malignancy, one that is spread through the investigation, it's spread through the prosecution from the very start, from the jump. A cancer that cannot be cut out, a cancer that cannot be cured. And that cancer has a name. His name is Michael Proctor. Now, you didn't hear his name in the prosecution's opening statement. Not once. And I suspect that was probably by design.
That's rough stuff. That's rough stuff. Can you imagine being referred to as a cancer? Like, ouch. But he also called out. Now, I wonder if he just threw that in there or if he suspected they weren't going to mention him in the opening statement and already had that in there. I don't know. But he said, hey, you didn't hear them mention him at one time. And let me tell you why.
But make no mistake about it. The evidence will show in this case that Michael Proctor is the very definition of the Commonwealth's case. And he's also their Achilles heel. He was the lead investigator on the case officer, the architect of the entire prosecution. You'll learn there's not a single part of this case, folks, not a single part, that he didn't touch, that he didn't direct, that he didn't orchestrate personally. Every single bit of it has his fingerprints on it. You'll learn that Michael Proctor was a longtime family friend of the Alberts. And he's been disgraced by his own agency, not by us, by the Massachusetts State Police. Investigated, suspended, and fired. The evidence will show that Massachusetts State Police found Michael Proctor guilty of bringing dishonor to the department for his conduct, not in some other case, not in some tangential case, in this case. The investigation of Karen Read. Conduct that included bias in favor of his friends, the all-powerful Albert family, and bias against my client, Miss Read, the outsider. Do you have any idea how hard it is for a state trooper to get fired? Well, the evidence is going to show that Michael Proctor earned it. Every bit of it.
Okay. If you are a juror sitting on this case and you don't know anything about it, and you hear that the lead investigator was fired as a result of his bias in the case that you are hearing right now, and his bias against the defendant who is sitting at that defense table, that's gotta be like a yikes moment. I think it would at least pique your interest, like, hang on a second. Well, why didn't Brennan tell us about this guy? Because that seems like a pretty big fucking deal, right? And would you then as a juror start to feel maybe a little bit misled? It just doesn't, that's not a good look, I don't think, for the Commonwealth. Now, he goes on to talk about that early on in the investigation, like literally like the day one, Michael Proctor was in a group text with his high school buddies, and he said, and these are texts that he didn't think anybody was ever going to see, and nobody would have seen them had there not been an investigation into this case, and then his personal phone would not have been gone through, but now it is. And he says that that the Boston cop, is not going to catch any shit, all of that kind of stuff. He's a cop too. He also says some other really, really, really disgusting things that we'll hear about later in trial. He does also go to talk about how that night, the night that everything happened, that it was a regular Friday night for everybody involved, that John O'Keefe and Karen were just going to go out on a date, that other people around them said they were lovey-dovey, they were having a good time, they didn't seem to be fighting, all of that kind of stuff. They start at CF McCarthy's, they go to the waterfall. There's so many Boston accents in this case, and it's like, and I'm so bad at them, but anyway. And they, the Alberts are this well-known family in Canton that they invited everybody over to their house after. Now, he kind of does a little bit of a like, here are all the key players, okay? Because the Albert family is going to be central to this case. Brian Albert owns the home. Brian and Nicole Albert, they're married. They own the home, 34 Fairview, where John O'Keefe's body was found on the front lawn, okay? But we're also going to learn about Brian Albert's brother, Chris Albert. He sits on the select board in Canton, which governs the police department, the Canton PD, okay? That's important. Chris's wife, Julie. So we have Brian and Nicole, Chris and Julie over here, okay? brother and sister. They were all there. Their daughter, Caitlin Albert, was there. Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, and her husband, Matt McCabe. So Jennifer McCabe and Nicole Albert are sisters. They don't look anything alike to me. Obviously that happens, but anyway. They were all there. Another man by the name of Brian Higgins, who is also a law enforcement officer, and longtime friend of Brian Albert, was there. So Brian Albert, Brian Higgins had spent most of the day together. We'll hear that in their testimony, but they had been drinking most of that night. Brian Higgins has an office at the Canton Police Department. He does not work for the Canton PD, but he has an office there. I believe he's a DEA agent. And for whatever reason, as a favor to him, the police chief let him have an office there or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, that's what he said in the last trial. Brian Albert and Brian Higgins had spent a lot of the day together. They'd been drinking, whatever. Brian Higgins and Karen Read had previously engaged in some flirty text messages. If you want to know the definition of cringe, wait till we have to hear Brian Higgins read these text messages out loud. Yuck. I am so glad that hopefully, none of my flirty text messages, when I was like dating Andrew before we got married, will ever see the light of day, and I'll have to read them in court because, ew. Could you imagine, like, when you're doing all your like flirty stuff or whatever, if you had to frickin' read that out in court? It's horrific, and he has to do it, and it's really bad. Brian Higgins does not have a lot of game, I will say that much. And his accent reading it is kind of funny to me because, like, it's just so different from ours. So, like, in one of them, he texts her, like, you're hot, but he's like, you hot? And, like, I don't know, it's just kind of funny to me. But anyway, so Alan Jackson says they'd been having some kind of flirty text messages, but prior to this, Karen Read had ghosted him. She'd cut it off. They're not texting anymore. So it's been several days since he's heard from her, and then the next time he sees her since the time before when they had texted was here at the waterfall that night, and she's on a date with her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, and she doesn't talk to him. She doesn't pay him any attention. That's the first time he sees her. He also talks about... that there's video footage of them in the waterfall, and they do seem pretty lovey-dovey. And he talks about John and Karen getting to the Albert residence. That the bar was closing around midnight, so the Alberts invite everybody back. They go to the house. They're trying to make sure that they're at the right place. They'd never been to 34 Fairview before. The evidence, he says, will establish that John got out of the SUV, goes into the house, and he says, again, the facts unequivocally, the data, the science, the witnesses will all unequivocally establish that John O'Keefe went into the Albert home that night. Eyewitnesses and forensic data will establish that fact. When he didn't come back out, so Karen says he was supposed to go in, make sure that we were even in the right house, and that it was okay for us to be here because we weren't super close with these people. So it was like, did you mean us come back too? Was that where you're just trying to be nice? That kind of thing. So he's supposed to go in and he's supposed to come back out and say either yes or no that we're at the right house, and yes or no that we can stay. It seemed like they wanted us here. Should we stay? Should we not stay? Whatever. So he says when he doesn't come back out, her initial feeling is frustration because she's not thinking that something bad happened to him at this point. At this point, she's thinking he went in, started doing shots with people, and forgot that I was out in the car, right? So she eventually gets pissed and she leaves and she goes back to his house. And that's when she starts leaving the voicemails. She had, texted him, called him, all that stuff. She starts leaving the voicemails and she's getting pretty upset with him. And he says that, you will hear that she's agitated in these voicemails. There is name calling. You're going to hear the context of all of these voicemails, but he doesn't come back out of the house, all that stuff. She believes that John had just left her sitting there and he's partying with his friends, right? He says the evidence will show that John and Karen never had a crossword. That night before this happened, they were having a good night. Everything was fine. And she had absolutely no way of knowing at the time. It wasn't that he wouldn't respond to her. It was that he couldn't respond to her. And so now we're going to hear a little bit about their expert.
And the evidence will show you why. Let's talk about that. We'll introduce you to a doctor named Elizabeth LaPosada, a renowned forensic pathologist, a medical examiner, and a professor at Brown University. She will tell you that the injury to the back...
This feed does not like to...
He couldn't walk, talk, grab his phone, cry for help, nothing. He was completely incapacitated, completely unconscious from the moment he suffered that injury. He was completely still and incapable of interacting with anyone or anything. But the doctor will tell you something more, and just as important. She'll tell you that John O'Keefe did not suffer from hypothermia, as the Commonwealth will undoubtedly allege. His body showed no signs of it. No frostbite, no cold-induced injuries to his organs, no damage based on cold or frost. Ladies and gentlemen, the scientific evidence and the medical evidence will establish that John O'Keefe had to be injured somewhere else, somewhere warmer, and his body had to have been moved out into the cold. And that's where, ultimately at 6 a.m., Karen found him the next morning. You will learn that John did not have a single injury consistent with being hit by a car. Let me say that again. The evidence will establish that John did not suffer a single injury on his body consistent with having been hit by a car. Not one.
Which also the prosecutor kind of said in his opening statement, right? The first responders, they hear Karen, all of them hear Karen saying, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. But they're just ignoring that because it doesn't match up with the injuries that they see on his body, which is very interesting.
You'll learn that John's torso, his ribs, his chest, his arms, his hips, his legs, his knees, his ankles, his feet, all of them, no broken bones, no fractures, no contusions, no torn ligaments, no internal injuries, not even a bruise. Nothing consistent with a car accident, despite the Commonwealth's contention that he was slammed into by a 6,000-pound SUV. Not a bruise. Dr. LaPosada will tell you with medical certainty that, in fact, John was not struck by a vehicle. Medically and scientifically, he could not have been struck by a vehicle. Therefore, as I said, there was no collision. She will tell you that the patterned abrasions on John's right arm, the patterned abrasions you see over my left shoulder, they're not the result of being struck by a car or taillight. You'll take one look at these injuries and you'll agree with Dr. LaPosada. The evidence will show that these injuries are from an animal, like a large dog, like the large dog that was inside the Albert house that night. You'll learn that Brian Albert has actually admitted that his large dog, the family dog, is, quote, not good with strangers. And of course, John, never having been to the house before, was a stranger that night. You'll also learn that oddly, very oddly, after having their family pet for 7 years, a short time after this incident, the Alberts got rid of that dog. They called it rehoming her. But she was gone. Dr. LaPosada will also tell you that the injury to John's head was not the result of falling backward onto a flat lawn, cold or otherwise. Rather, Dr. LaPosada will tell you with medical certainty that the injury pattern to his scalp was produced by an impact from a raised or ledged surface, a surface that does not exist on Brian Albert's front lawn where John was found. The medical evidence will establish no hypothermia, no injuries from a car strike, no collision with a motor vehicle. And forensic analysis of John's cell phone, Mr. Brennan mentioned that in his opening statement. The Commonwealth's own expert will ultimately support the exact facts that I just told you, including the temperature data. John O'Keefe was injured someplace warmer, and he was moved. That alone is reasonable doubt.
It is very interesting, too, that they are both saying that they've got this. The temperature data is new to this trial. They didn't have that in the last trial. No, neither of them used it. I don't think they had it. It is interesting that they are both saying, we've got this temperature data, and it's going to prove exactly my case. Like, both of them are saying that. It obviously is going to have to be perceived differently, at least, on each side for it to prove their case. He also talks about, that all of these people that gathered at the Alberts' house that night would have had to leave by the front door, just feet from where John O'Keefe's body was laying. And the Commonwealth says, that he'd been there since 12:30 a.m., right? All of these people are leaving. All of them have to pull out of the driveway where they would drive directly past where his body is laying. None of them saw a 6'2", 216-pound man laying in the snow. The snow has begun at this point. He is wearing darker clothing. I mean, he's certainly not wearing all white. They didn't see it. Another person that didn't see it was the snowplow driver that night. He plowed the streets. He certainly didn't see anybody laying in a front lawn, and John O'Keefe's body was very close to the road on the front lawn. He also talks about how Michael Proctor wrote a report that said Fairview wasn't plowed that night, so there was no need to find anybody and ask them, did they see? But the defense found the snowplow driver, and they talked to whatever company it is or the city or whoever that they contract out to plow the streets during a situation like this. And they said, yeah, it was plowed, and this is the person that did it, so they wouldn't talk to them. And he says, no, I certainly never saw anybody there. So he talks about how, what Michael Proctor put in his report was a lie, that it was plowed, and there was somebody who he could have asked, and he didn't. And when he asked, he would have said, no, there was nobody there. And that driver did testify in the last trial. I assume he's going to testify in this trial because he's bringing it up here. And he also talks about the fact that he saw the snowplow driver saw an obstruction at 3:30 a.m. He looked in the street in the very spot where Karen would later find John's body at 6 a.m. And at 3:30 a.m., there was a dark Ford Edge parked right there in the street, right there. And there's a whole thing that goes into this. If somebody's car is parked on the street when they're plowing, they can get a ticket, they can get in trouble. So as a favor, because it's the Alberts and everybody knows them, his testimony in the last trial was that he let them know to move it or whatever, but he had to make a note of it that it was there. Anyway, who's moving cars at 3:30 in the morning in a blizzard on the side of the road? He says Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, completely ignored that fact. He didn't try to find out who owned a Ford Edge. He didn't try to find out what the Ford Edge was for, but the Alberts owned it. He says, you'll learn that those facts will add to the mounting and overwhelming evidence that there was no collision and that John O'Keefe's body was moved onto the lawn. This is more reasonable doubt. They talk about the physics, even from Commonwealth's own experts, that will establish that Karen Read's SUV was not damaged by hitting a pedestrian. And his injuries did not come from being struck by a vehicle. And he talks about the physics not adding up to this collision even happening. We'll talk about that, I guess, when we get there. But if you watch the first trial, shout out Trooper Paul. My God, with the pirouette. And Karen's at home. She's asleep. But while she's asleep, he goes into how busy all of the people who were at the Albert home that night partying are during this period of time when they never saw John's body in the front yard. They don't know that he's outside. They don't know that anything's happened to him, all that kind of stuff. What we learn is that Brian Higgins, remember the DEA agent guy, leaves Brian Albert's house and he drives over to the Canton Police Department where he kept an office. It's about 1:25 in the morning. And he goes there to do some what he called administrative work in a blizzard at 1:25 in the morning. He made a call at 1:30 in the morning that he denied that he ever made. But his phone records show it, and he says, I don't remember that, whatever. He said that Brian Higgins' explanation for why he even went back to the police department in the middle of the night during a blizzard after he'd been drinking and drinking and drinking changes every time you ask him. He says that Brian Albert during this time says, I didn't talk to anybody except my wife during this time period from like when everybody left to the next morning. He says that is also a complete lie. The phone records will establish that Brian Albert placed a call to none other than Brian Higgins at 2:22 in the morning after Higgins had been at the Canton PD. What would they need to talk about during that time? And he says the evidence will establish that Brian Albert called Brian Higgins first, then Brian Albert disconnected the call when Brian Higgins didn't answer. And then seconds later, Brian Higgins returned the call and they spoke for 22 seconds. They had a conversation. When they were asked about those phone calls, how they happened, like why, if you don't remember, like how did one of you call, then the other one called, then the other one called you back. They played phone tag and phone answer and then phone tag back, right? And their response to that, and I wish I was joking, you guys, was those were butt dials. All of them. He butt dialed me. I butt dialed him back, I guess. Then he butt dialed me back because he didn't know he called. I didn't know I called. He didn't know. I didn't know he called. He didn't know I called. And then the 22-second phone call where they both connect at the same time, that's a butt answer. All of it. All of it's butt stuff. A lot of butt stuff in this case, okay? They literally say butt dials, butt answers, butt call. I mean, what am I supposed to do about this, right? My butt does all the talking, I guess. Chloe, their dog, is not the only thing that got rehomed, because shortly before they were supposed to surrender their phones, potentially, there was a court order to not get rid of their phones. Just before that court order went into effect, maybe, or something like that, both of their phones got rehomed, okay? They don't have their phones anymore. Neither of them. Both of them got rid of their phones. And the other thing that Brian Albert got rid of was the home, 34 Fairview. And apparently this was like a childhood home. It was a home that had been in his family for generations, and he sold the house shortly after this. Now, do people sell houses? Yes. Those three things together, after this happens on his front lawn, it doesn't sound great. I mean, you could go either way with that, I think. It's a totality thing, I think. And I think it's a compelling opening statement. He does talk about Proctor just kind of ignoring everybody else, not asking any questions, that kind of stuff. He also talks about Jen McCabe and her phone activity during this time. I personally think he had enough without talking about Jen McCabe. I'll briefly explain to you the Jen McCabe stuff, and then I have to shut up because I've been going now for over an hour, so I need to shut up. But Jen McCabe, her phone records show that she made a Google search at 2:22 a.m., I believe, or a little after 2 a.m. I'm sorry, 2:27. Yeah, the phone call between Albert and Higgins that was a butt answer was 2:22, and then her search was 2:27 a.m. And the Celebrite information says that her Google search read, Haas longed to die in the cold. It was supposed to be How, but Haas. She had misspelled it. Haas longed to die in the cold. Okay. How did she know that? This is hours before they found his body. All of these things. I don't know. I don't know if that's really going to do a lot for the jury. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Would that sway you one way or the other? It's definitely weird, but I think with your Michael Proctor, with your red Solo cups, with your all of these other things, I don't know that the McCabe Google search is that important. They also say that the phone record showed that was later deleted, that search was. They talk about Karen finally gets up at 5 o'clock. She realizes that John had not come home, and that's when she assumed something bad must have happened, because she wasn't even really supposed to stay at his house that night. John had asked her to stay at his house that night because of the blizzard coming in. Her plan was to go back to her. She owned her own house So she was going to go home that night. He had asked her to stay with him because of the weather. And her niece and nephew were at home, and he never would have not come home with them home, especially if he wasn't sure if she was going to be there when he got there, right? So she knew something was really, really wrong. Now, when you hear her demeanor on the morning of January the 29th, when she is trying to locate him, when she does not know where he is, either she's a really, really good actress or she is genuinely terrified, doesn't understand what happened, and she is worried beyond belief. He describes it as abject fear. And it sounds legit. Everybody has their own opinion of that, but it definitely seemed very, very genuine and like what is happening in all of these things. We also learn that morning when she gets up to go look for John, that there's another explanation for why that taillight on her Lexus is cracked.
Meadows, that was John's house where Karen was staying. She backed out of the garage, and during the course of the trial, you'll hear that she actually struck another car with that right rear taillight. During the course of this trial, the Commonwealth is going to desperately claim that Karen Read's taillight was actually damaged by hitting John O'Keefe. They'll have no evidence of it, mind you, none, but they'll make the claim. We'll show you a video of exactly how that taillight was originally damaged, or exactly what happened at 5:07 in the morning. The facts will show that it was damaged in John's own driveway at 5:07 when Karen backed up and made contact with another car in the driveway. This is 5 hours after she dropped John off and he went into the Albert residence. As a result, the taillight was minimally cracked, but it wasn't completely shattered or damaged or broken. And that's the condition of the SUV when Michael Proctor got a hold of it. That becomes important. You'll hear from an independent police officer, an eyewitness to the damage on that SUV, someone not connected to Michael Proctor or under his control. And he'll tell you that he saw the taillight damaged before it was in Michael Proctor's possession, but it was not completely shattered. And you won't have to speculate how that taillight got cracked originally. You'll see it for yourself. It's on video.
That's also very interesting. There is video of her backing into that car, and they'll play it. It will be there. So that's very interesting. Another police officer at some point in the investigation, who's not connected to Canton PD, also saw the condition of the taillight before Michael Proctor got it with the search warrant, and he says it's cracked, it's not shattered. Now, this is going to be a big part of the case because by the time Michael Proctor gets a hold of it, there's 47 pieces missing from it. So, and it's like this big open, like there's nothing left of the light, basically. So that will be a point of contention in this case. And remember, that's the same Michael Proctor who got fired for his investigation of this case, his bias and his not following the rules, essentially. He also says that in that video clip that the prosecution showed where she says he didn't look mortally wounded to me, she didn't mean that night when she left him. She meant when she saw him, that when she found him that morning at 6 a.m, that she's there, she's trying to give him CPR and all those things, that she said he didn't look mortally wounded to her in that moment. She didn't think, she knew he was hurt, but she didn't think he would die. So he's trying to add some context there. We hear that the I hit him, which was supposedly said to multiple first responders at the scene, was never memorialized in any report, was never mentioned to any police officers, at least not on the day that it happened. He lists all of these people that came into contact with Karen Read that day, and many of them said, oh, I heard her say this, or I saw this, or all of this stuff, but none of them reported having heard Karen Read say, I hit him. And then he kind of gets into some of this Albert stuff in an interesting way.
The facts will show that the first time this improved statement was ever claimed to have been made was some 24 hours later by a single EMT in an interview. Now listen to this. In an interview coordinated by a Canton police detective named Kevin Albert. Brian Albert's brother.
Another Albert.
And remember, Chris Albert, the other brother, is a board selectman to whom the Canton Police Department reports. And what's more, you'll learn that Katie McLaughlin, that's the EMT, that's the single EMT, the first person to have claimed to have heard this unrecorded and unreported statement, is years long, close personal friends with a young woman named Caitlin Albert. You heard that right. It's Brian Albert's daughter. During the course of this trial, you'll become familiar with and you'll realize that the Alberts are indeed a powerful and indeed an influential family, and that will mean something. You'll learn that there are other major problems with the prosecution's case. The evidence will establish that Michael Proctor himself, the lead investigator and architect of this entire case, has a long-standing and personal relationship with the Albert family. Yes, that same Albert family.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a kind of small town, but Michael Proctor, Massachusetts State Police trooper, former, he's fired now, knew the Albert family. He attended weddings. He knew them very well. Julie Albert had babysat his kids before. She had his personal cell phone number. He had her personal cell phone number. It's a lot. And there is more to it than just they know each other. And again, that will come out in the testimony. But basically, he kind of goes into, the evidence wasn't kept properly. The way that Michael Proctor put things into reports was not true. All of these things. So, he says, you will go to 34 Fairview. They're going to have a jury view of the area, and you'll see the way that the scene would have looked. He also says, Michael Proctor had access to the vehicle before a single piece of taillight material was ever found at the scene. He said there were 2 searches. The first and second search found nothing. And this was by what they call the CERT team. And I don't know exactly what that stands for. They'll tell us again this time, I forget. But that person testified as well. And they did like a grid search. Like they were like shoulder to shoulder going through the snow. They didn't find anything. And then he says, but after Michael Proctor gets a hold of that SUV and it's in his custody and control, suddenly items started magically showing up, and not just a few items. 46 pieces of taillight, many of them bright red, are laying in the snow, but none of these other independent officers found any of them. 46 pieces. That's concerning. He says, they're going to try to dazzle you with talk of DNA because it sounds so scientific. The DNA was on the taillight, but there was no DNA on the shards that they claim came into contact with his arm. And the Commonwealth alleges that John O'Keefe's arm, all of those deep scratches came from that taillight shattering. And he says, all of this is going to really go against their case, that any of the DNA evidence in this case, any of the other evidence in this case is really going to go against it. And he then talks about reasonable doubt. They bear the burden, the Commonwealth. Highest burden known to our justice system. They must prove every element of the charge beyond a reasonable doubt into a moral certainty. And a moral certainty means the highest level of certainty known in human affairs. And obviously that is very high burden. And they're not going to be able to do that when every piece of this case was handled by a disgraced investigator with a motive to protect his friends. And the physical evidence contradicts their very theory. And when their own medical examiner won't even call this case a homicide. And he does talk about how they tried to get the medical examiner to rule it a homicide. She wouldn't do it. She ruled it as undetermined. They actually kind of did like a presentation for her with like all the evidence and saying, look, this really was a homicide. Like, this is what we think. And she was like, nah, I'm good. I'm not going to rule that. Their own coroner also says that his injuries don't match a vehicle accident. So it's a crazy case, you guys. That's the opening statement. So that's Alan Jackson for the defense. Hank Brennan is the special prosecutor in this case. Let me know what you guys think. If you didn't know anything about the case, how do you feel about the opening statements? Did they have you leaning one way or another? Did you feel one way at the prosecution and then change your mind after hearing the defense? What do you think about this? and I'm going to keep covering this case as it moves forward. I do have like a little end screen, and I don't know if it works, so I'm gonna try and play it real quick, and then we will end, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another episode of Killer Queens. Did you know we have a podcast? Be sure to check us out anywhere you listen to yours. New episodes drop each Tuesday. And if you want bonus content, be sure to join the channel or find us at patreon.com/killerqueenspod. Okay, I don't know if that worked. It doesn't let me hear it, so I hope it did. If it didn't, you're like, what was that? There was supposed to be sound with it. But thank you guys for hopping on here. 74 views. That's pretty awesome. I don't know how long those were or anything like that, but for my first one that we're really doing here, I just appreciate you so much for being here, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye.